The rain hit the marble steps of the Grandeur Imperial Hotel in cold, needle-thin sheets, soaking through the fabric of Sophia Renner's simple black gown within seconds of the security guards pushing her through the revolving doors and onto the wet stone outside. What would you do if you had spent 4 months organizing every detail of a charity gala, every floral arrangement, every catered course, every curated artwork hung on those gilded walls, only to be physically removed from the building on the night of the event by guards following orders from a woman who wanted you gone simply because you were more beautiful than her? What would you do if that woman screamed across the hotel lobby in front of every guest attending the evening you had built? From nothing, that the VIP hall did not accept trash without lineage. Sophia stood on those wet marble steps, rain soaking her hair flat against her face, watching through the lobby's glass walls as Celestine Voss smoothed her designer gown and accepted compliments from the very guests who had just watched a woman be thrown into the rain without lifting a single manicured finger to object. None of them, not Celestine in her blinding diamonds, not her father's security guards who had carried out the order without question, not a single person sipping champagne in that warm, golden lobby had the slightest idea that in less than 7 minutes, an imperial convoy of vehicles flying diplomatic flags would be sealing off the entire city block, and a man with the authority to purchase the entire hotel chain with a single signature would be stepping out of the lead vehicle specifically to escort the woman they had just thrown into the cold. To understand how Sophia Renner ended up standing in the rain outside a hotel she had spent 4 months preparing for an event she was no longer permitted to attend, we need to travel back nearly 2 years to a quiet, temperature-controlled conservation studio in the basement of the Aldenmere Museum of Fine Art, where a woman calling herself Sophia Renner worked as a paintings conservator, spending her days carefully cleaning centuries-old canvases with cotton swabs and solvent solutions, her mornings filled with the particular, focused silence of someone who understood that the most important work often happens slowly, invisibly, in rooms most people never see. Nobody at that museum, not her colleagues, not the curators who occasionally stopped by her studio to check on restoration progress, not a single visitor who passed through the museum's public galleries overhead had any idea that the precise, patient woman studying brushwork under a magnifying lamp was, in fact, Her Imperial Highness, Princess Sophia von Veldenmoor, sole heir to the Veldenmoor imperial throne, a dynasty whose sovereign wealth fund, accumulated across 13 generations of careful stewardship, exceeded $2.5 trillion in banking, industrial, and sovereign investment holdings distributed strategically across 4 continents. She had grown up inside a palace of pale granite and ancient tapestries, educated from childhood by private tutors who taught her that every human interaction carried invisible layers of calculation, that every friendship offered to her was filtered first through the knowledge of her inheritance, that no man would ever look at her and see simply Sophia rather than the extraordinary fortune waiting behind her name. By the time she turned 28, she had grown desperately tired of being known entirely for what she owned rather than who she was, and with her father's reluctant blessing, had constructed an elaborate anonymous identity complete with forged academic credentials from a respected conservation program, a modest rented apartment above a florist's shop, and a bank account containing only the earnings of a mid-level museum employee. She wanted, more than anything, to discover what it felt like to exist in the world as simply herself, valued for her patience, her knowledge, her genuine love of art, rather than for the empire waiting patiently behind her disguise. Her work at the museum brought her into contact with dozens of interesting people, but it was through the museum's events planning committee that she first met Julian Hargrove, a junior development officer who worked the fundraising side of the museum's charitable initiatives, a man whose genuine enthusiasm for the institution's mission and whose apparent lack of any particular interest in status or money initially convinced her she had found exactly the kind of uncomplicated connection she had been searching for. Julian worked long hours for modest pay, always the last to leave the office after fundraising calls, always willing to help with tasks far beneath his job description simply because the work mattered to him, or so it appeared. He brought Sophia tea during long conservation sessions without being asked, remembered the names of every painting she was currently working on, and told her one evening, sharing takeaway containers on the museum's back steps after a long planning meeting, that he thought there was something genuinely remarkable about a person who could spend months saving a painting most people would never notice had been repaired at all. Sophia, moved by the sentiment, allowed herself to fall carefully, hoping this quiet, dedicated man was exactly what he appeared to be. Their relationship grew slowly and warmly over the following months, built on modest dates and long conversations about art and history, Julian taking her to gallery openings at small, independent spaces across the city, bringing her books about restoration techniques he had tracked down at secondhand shops because he had listened carefully enough to know which gaps in her collection she mentioned most often. He never asked about her family beyond polite curiosity, never pushed when she deflected questions about her past, and seemed genuinely content to exist within the quiet, pleasant life she had constructed around herself. She began imagining a future built on exactly this kind of uncomplicated warmth, and for nearly a year, the warmth felt entirely real. The complications arrived in the form of the Voss family, specifically Celestine Voss, daughter of the museum's largest corporate donor, Horatio Voss, whose company's annual contribution funded nearly 40% of the museum's operating budget, and who apparently believed this financial dependency conferred a degree of authority over the institution's staff and events that went considerably beyond what any reasonable interpretation of the donor relationship would support. Celestine had grown up surrounded by the particular brand of entitlement that flourishes in people who confuse inherited wealth with personal achievement. A young woman who wore her family's fortune like armor, projecting an aggressive, controlling authority into every room she entered, as though daring anyone to question her right to be its unquestioned center. From the moment Celestine became involved in planning the annual charity gala, using her father's financial leverage to insert herself onto the organizing committee, her attitude toward Sophia had been one of barely concealed contempt. At their first committee meeting, Celestine had swept into the conference room 15 minutes late, glanced over the detailed organizational plan Sophia had already distributed to the group, and dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "This is all very basic," she had said, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone accustomed to having their aesthetic preferences treated as objective truth. "Sophia, is it? You handle the conservation side, yes? Stick to the paintings, darling. Events require a certain taste level that, no offense, tends to come more naturally to some of us than others." The insult landed with surgical precision in front of 8 other committee members, and Sophia had simply smiled, continuing to present her organizational plan with the same calm composure she brought to every professional challenge. Her patience, refined across years of royal protocol training, allowed her to absorb the dismissal without visible reaction, though internally she noted, with cold clarity, exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. The microaggressions multiplied steadily over the 4 months of event preparation. At a committee planning session, Celestine interrupted Sophia's detailed presentation of the evening's proposed artwork installation to ask loudly whether Sophia had ever actually attended a gala of this caliber, suggesting, without quite saying it directly, that someone of Sophia's obvious social background might lack the necessary cultural reference points to curate an exhibition for genuinely discerning guests. At another meeting, Celestine arrived wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that she mentioned, seemingly at random, but clearly not at random at all, had cost considerably more than the museum's entire annual conservation budget. Watching Sophia's face as she set it for any reaction she might exploit. At a venue walkthrough, Celestine positioned herself between Sophia and the hotel's event manager during every important discussion, answering questions directed at Sophia as though she were simply not present in the room. Julian, who had begun accompanying Sophia to some committee meetings as a museum representative, said less and less in her defense with each passing week, increasingly deferring to Celestine's preferences during disagreements, even when Sophia's position was clearly better supported by the event's operational requirements. Celestine's family basically funds the whole thing, Julian explained one evening when Sophia gently raised the pattern she had noticed. If she wants the installation in the East Gallery instead of the atrium, it's not worth pushing back. Just let her have it. It's easier for everyone. Sophia had said nothing in response, simply absorbing the advice with a composure that gave nothing away. Despite 4 months of Celestine systematically attempting to diminish her contributions, Sophia had quietly ensured that every logistical element of the gala was executed to an extraordinary standard, coordinating catering, artwork placement, lighting design, guest experience flow, and charitable auction items with meticulous, invisible precision. The evening of the gala arrived looking exactly as she had envisioned it 8 weeks earlier when she had first sketched the layout on a notepad in her small museum office. Warm golden light cascading from carefully positioned fixtures across the hotel's grand ballroom. 12 original paintings from the museum's collection displayed at intervals along the walls in custom frames she had personally selected. The overall atmosphere simultaneously intimate and magnificent. It was, by every objective measure, a masterpiece of event organization. It was also, as of approximately 8:45 that evening, an event from which Sophia had just been physically removed. The sequence of events that led to her standing soaked on those marble steps had begun approximately 30 minutes into the gala's cocktail hour, when Celestine, having spent the earlier part of the evening accepting compliments for an event she had contributed minimally to organizing, noticed several guests gravitating naturally toward Sophia during conversation, drawn by her genuine knowledge of the artwork displayed around the room and the warm, quietly confident way she engaged with whoever spoke to her. The sight of Sophia holding natural, easy authority in a room Celestine considered her own territory had apparently been more than she was willing to tolerate. Sophia had been mid-conversation with a pair of museum patrons near the East Gallery's entrance when Celestine appeared at her elbow, 2 of her father's personal security guards flanking her with practiced efficiency. "I need a word," Celestine had said, her voice pitched low but carrying an edge that suggested the word she needed was not particularly pleasant. Actually, several words, starting with the fact that this is a VIP event for people with appropriate backgrounds, and I have decided your presence this evening is no longer appropriate. The museum patrons standing nearby had gone very still, looking at their shoes or their champagne glasses rather than at Sophia, the particular discomfort of people witnessing a public cruelty too significant to pretend they had not noticed. "I organized this event," Sophia said calmly, without raising her voice. "Every element you see tonight was planned by me over 4 months of detailed work. And you've been paid your modest little salary for that work," Celestine replied, her voice carrying across the nearby guests with deliberate, theatrical volume, "which means your function here has concluded. Security, please escort this woman out. The VIP hall does not accept trash without lineage." The words landed like a slap across the suddenly silent gallery, and the 2 guards, apparently operating under standing instructions from the Voss family that superseded any reasonable professional protocol, moved forward and gripped Sophia firmly by the arms, guiding her toward the lobby's revolving doors with practiced, impersonal efficiency. Sophia did not resist. She walked with the guards in calm, deliberate silence, her expression betraying absolutely nothing of the storm building beneath her composed exterior. Though every guest they passed in the lobby witnessed the spectacle of a woman being removed from an event she had created, none of them saying a word in objection. Through the revolving doors, down the shallow marble steps, and into the cold rain, which was falling now with the particular insistence of a storm that had been building all evening. For a long moment, standing on those wet steps, with rain soaking steadily through her simple black gown, Sophia simply breathed, feeling the cold seep into her skin and the weight of the evening settle over her with absolute, final clarity. Then she raised her left wrist and pressed a small, almost invisible button set into the face of her watch, a device her personal security detail had insisted she carry at all times throughout her entire period of anonymous exile, disguised as an ordinary timepiece and accessible only through a specific pressure pattern she had memorized 3 years earlier during security protocol training. Somewhere across the city, in a secure communications vehicle that had been parked discreetly within a 5-minute radius of Sophia's location every single day for nearly 2 years, a signal receiver activated, and within 30 seconds, the lead vehicle of an imperial convoy that had been maintained at constant readiness throughout the duration of Sophia's anonymous residence began moving. 6 minutes later, the first vehicle turned onto the hotel's street. They arrived in complete, overwhelming silence, which somehow made them more terrifying than any siren could have achieved. 40 vehicles in total, large, matte black SUVs and diplomatic sedans flying small imperial pennants from their front-mounted flag holders, the flags barely visible in the rain, but unmistakable to anyone who recognized the Velden imperial seal. They filled the street with disciplined, geometric precision, the lead vehicle stopping directly in front of the hotel's entrance, the others fanning out in formation behind it, effectively sealing the entire block from any traffic in either direction. Inside the hotel lobby, guests who had drifted toward the windows or the revolving entrance doors began noticing the convoy, and a ripple of confused, increasingly alarmed murmuring moved through the assembled elite guests. The lead vehicle's rear door opened, and a man stepped out who required no introduction to anyone with even passing familiarity with European geopolitics, though very few of the guests gathered in that lobby that evening had ever expected to encounter him in person. Emperor Aldrich von Veldenmoor, 71 years old, straight-backed, broad-shouldered, his formal diplomatic coat bearing the Veldenmoor imperial crest on its breast pocket, moved through the rain toward the hotel's entrance with the particular unhurried authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush because every room in the world could wait for him to arrive. Flanking him were 6 personal guards in dark tactical uniform, and behind them, 3 men in formal legal attire carrying briefcases whose weight and thickness suggested documents of considerable legal significance. He did not enter the hotel immediately. He walked directly toward his daughter, standing soaked on the marble steps, and regarded her for a long moment with an expression that contained, simultaneously, deep paternal tenderness and a cold fury that had nothing tender about it. "Your signal reached me during dinner," he said quietly, his voice audible only to her, despite the rain and the noise of the surrounding convoy. "I came immediately." He removed his diplomatic coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, a gesture so simply human in its contrast to the overwhelming imperial power surrounding them that several of the hotel staff, watching from inside the lobby's glass walls, felt something tighten in their chests. "Now," he said, offering her his arm, "let us go inside." The revolving doors of the Grandeur Imperial Hotel had never before admitted a reigning emperor, and the physical sensation of 200 guests registering that fact in real time was almost audible, a collective, sharp intake of breath that moved through the lobby like a wave as Emperor Aldrich von Veldenmoor walked through the entrance with Sophia at his side, his guards spreading in formation behind him, his legal team moving with quiet, practiced efficiency toward the reception desk. Every conversation in the lobby stopped, every champagne glass lowered. The hotel's general manager, who had been managing an unrelated crisis in the back office, appeared in the lobby doorway, took one look at the scene before him, and went the color of a bleached tablecloth. Celestine Voss stood near the ballroom entrance, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand, still radiating the satisfied confidence of a woman who had just successfully asserted her dominance over a room she believed herself to own. When she registered the source of the commotion in the lobby, her expression moved through confusion, then recognition, then a dawning, catastrophic comprehension that aged her entire face in the span of 3 seconds. Her champagne glass trembled in her grip. The Emperor did not look at her. He did not acknowledge her presence at all, moving instead directly toward the reception desk, where his legal team had already spread documents across the counter's polished surface, the hotel's bewildered duty manager standing behind it, looking as though he were sincerely reconsidering his entire career. "I understand this establishment is part of the Grandeur Imperial hospitality chain," the Emperor said to the duty manager, his voice calm, conversational, carrying the particular tone of a man discussing nothing more remarkable than a hotel reservation. 14 properties across 8 cities, I believe. The duty manager nodded weakly, apparently unable to produce words. "Good. I would like to purchase the chain, all 14 properties, tonight, in full." He nodded toward his lead legal advisor, who produced a thick document from his briefcase and laid it flat on the reception counter. "That's," the duty manager began, his voice barely audible. "That's, sir, the chain is, the acquisition value would be in the range of, we couldn't possibly, the full acquisition price," the Emperor said simply, as though explaining something to a slow but well-meaning child, "has already been transferred into escrow through the Veldenmoor sovereign banking channel. Your chain's board of directors has been notified within the last 4 minutes. I am told they accepted the offer unanimously and immediately." He produced a single pen from his breast pocket, signed the acquisition document with one deliberate, unhurried stroke, and handed the pen back to his advisor without looking down. "The transaction is complete." A sound escaped from Celestine's direction that fell somewhere between a gasp and a cry, and she moved forward, her earlier confidence completely dissolved into something desperate and unguarded. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "I don't believe you fully understand what happened this evening. There's clearly been some misunderstanding. I certainly had no idea that the woman in question was in any way connected to—" The Emperor turned to look at her then, for the first time, and the particular quality of his attention, cold and absolute and entirely devoid of the social courtesy that softens human interaction, stopped Celestine mid-sentence as effectively as a physical barrier. "You ordered security guards to remove my daughter from a building she organized, into the rain, while screaming that she was trash without lineage," he said. Every word landed with the weight of a sovereign decree. "There is no misunderstanding. There is only what you did, and what follows from it." He turned to the hotel's security chief, a broad-shouldered man who had been standing at rigid attention since the Emperor entered the lobby. "The security staff who physically removed my daughter from this building are terminated, effective immediately. They will be escorted off the property within the next 5 minutes. Then he turned back to Celestine. "As the new owner of this establishment, I am asking you to leave, now, without your coat." Celestine blinked, the instruction not quite registering at first. "My coat is in the cloakroom. I just need—" "Without your coat," the Emperor repeated, his tone unchanged, carrying the particular finality of someone who does not repeat themselves beyond exactly twice. 2 of his guards stepped forward with quiet, practiced efficiency, and Celestine, her champagne-colored gown, providing no protection from the cold rain waiting on the other side of the revolving doors, was escorted toward the exit with firm, impersonal authority. The guards guided her through the revolving doors and onto the same marble steps where she had sent Sophia 40 minutes earlier, the cold rain soaking immediately through her silk gown, her elaborate updo deflating within seconds under the steady downpour. Through the lobby's glass walls, 200 guests watched in stunned, absolute silence, champagne glasses raised and forgotten halfway to lips, the spectacular reversal of fortune unfolding before them, too significant and too swift to fully absorb in real time. Additionally, the emperor announced to the assembled lobby, his voice carrying easily through the space without effort, the Voss family's corporate sponsorship agreements with the Aldenmoor Museum, along with their business registration within Veldenmoor sovereign territory, are formally revoked effective midnight tonight. The relevant notifications have already been transmitted to the appropriate regulatory bodies. He turned to Sophia, who stood at his side in his diplomatic coat, rain still drying slowly in her hair, her expression carrying a composure and quiet authority that several guests would later describe as the most remarkable thing they had witnessed that entire extraordinary evening. "Is there anything else you would like addressed tonight?" he asked her, his tone shifting entirely into something gentle and private. Sophia considered the question for a moment. "No," she said quietly. "I think that covers everything." He nodded once, offered her his arm again, and they walked together back through the lobby, past the stunned, silent guests, past the legal team finalizing acquisition paperwork at the reception counter, past the general manager still standing behind the desk, with the expression of a man watching his career's entire context rewrite itself in real time, and toward the hotel's entrance, where the convoy waited to carry them away from an evening that had begun in the rain and was ending in something considerably more appropriate for an emperor's daughter. The weeks following the gala unfolded with the swift, merciless precision that only genuine sovereign authority could provide. Horatio Voss's company, stripped of its Veldenmoor business registration and its museum sponsorship agreement simultaneously, found several major European banking partners quietly withdrawing credit lines rather than risk association with a family that had just been publicly sanctioned by an imperial house. Celestine's social calendar emptied within the week, her invitations quietly withdrawn by hostesses who understood instinctively how proximity to a family banned from Veldenmoor territory might affect their own carefully maintained international relationships. Julian Hargrove, whose increasing passivity in the face of his employer's largest donor had already revealed the precise limits of his character, found his position at the museum quietly eliminated when the development budget was restructured in the aftermath of the Voss family's withdrawn sponsorship, the organization discovering, with some difficulty, exactly how dependent they had become on money that arrived with conditions attached. Sophia returned to Veldenmoor within the month, resuming her full imperial responsibilities with a renewed clarity that had been noticeably absent before her extended period of anonymous work. She had gone searching for a life uncomplicated by her birthright and had instead discovered something she had not expected to find, an unshakable certainty regarding her own worth, forged not within palace walls, but standing soaked on marble steps, refusing to beg or break, pressing a button on a watch, and waiting with absolute patience for the world to correct itself. Months later, during an interview celebrating an international arts preservation initiative she had established, she was asked whether she regretted her years working anonymously in museum conservation. She considered the question carefully, then answered with the same quiet, unshakable composure that had once stood in cold rain outside a hotel that now belonged to her family. "I learned that true character reveals itself most honestly in moments when people believe there will be no consequences for their cruelty," she said. Celestine believed a woman, without visible title, could be thrown into the rain without cost, because she assumed power always wears its crown openly. True power doesn't need to shout to be respected. It only needs to remember patiently until the exact moment arrives to remind everyone precisely what they underestimated. And so, dear viewer, that is how an imperial princess, disguised as a humble art conservator, was thrown into the rain outside a hotel she had spent 4 months building into something beautiful, and watched as her father purchased that hotel entirely in cash, expelled her tormentor into the same cold rain without her coat, and banned an entire family from a country they had never been powerful enough to truly understand. What did you think of this masterful revenge? Did Celestine get exactly what she deserved? If you loved watching arrogant elites lose absolutely everything in a single, unforgettable evening, smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and quiet imperial power finally reclaiming what was always rightfully hers.